Hi, I'm David Reardon for Integral Life, and today I'm talking to Cindy Wigglesworth, the creator of the Spiritual Intelligence Assessment. Now, this is a powerful new tool for our personal development. I mean, I think we all, as we expand into our spiritual lives and we go on these spiritual journeys, it's sort of this big meta thing that we can never quite get our hands around. Well, Cindy has developed an assessment that actually has 21 skills, and the good news here is that if we're weak on any of them, we can actually have things to work on to improve, the love in our own life and with our families, and also how to be more successful in any of our business ventures. So good morning, Cindy.
Good morning, David.
So I found this interesting. I took the assessment, right, personally, right? And, I'm like a lot of people in the Integral Life audience. As we move to this level of development, we try to bring spirit or love back into our lives, right? Not that it ever left, but just maybe we were off doing careers and whatever. And we want more. We want those bigger questions answered. And most importantly, we want to align whatever is coming through us with our everyday lives.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about, this assessment, and when we say spiritual intelligence, what do you actually mean by that?
Right. So I define spiritual intelligence as the ability to behave with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace, regardless of the situation. Wisdom and compassion represent love to me. It's the best of the mind and the best of the heart, behaving in a loving way and maintaining our calm no matter what is going on.
Which in this life is that we know that we all fail miserably every day, and we keep wanting to come back to it. But I thought that this, because we'll get into how rigorous an assessment it is. Not that it's hard to take, but that you really have thought about this. This is not some, sort of puffball, cosmopolitan survey.
No.
This is actually digging very deeply into these 21 skills. And what is revealed in our answers as we go through this is, I found just extremely helpful in noting where I'd made progress and where I still needed to make progress.
Yes,
right? Yeah.
yes.
So let's talk a little bit about where this came from, because as you pointed out in all of this, we're really aware of IQ. We're tested for it in school and all this. And then lately, or at least over the last period of time, emotional intelligence became a really hot subject because people started to recognize IQ wasn't enough if you weren't getting along with anybody or you couldn't manage your own emotions. And that was in our own personal lives as well as at work and family and things.
Yes.
So that was a big thing. It still is a big thing. It came online, and now spiritual intelligence is now emerged out of that. So can you talk a little bit about your personal story, about what you noticed? You had a big career in HR in the corporate world, and you also noticed some things personally for yourself that got you fired up to actually do this.
Yes. So from a business standpoint, I came out of college overdeveloped on IQ and got appropriate feedback from my first few supervisors about needing to work on my interpersonal skills, which we would now call our emotional intelligence. And I didn't have the advantage of the EQ work. Daniel Goleman and Richard Boyatzis' material had not come out yet. So I sort of self-taught and went to some supervisory classes and learned a few things. And along the way, independent of work, I started doing some spiritual work. I found a new church, really started digging in on some very applied spirituality, not theoretical stuff. I had been raised Christian and exhorted continually to love your neighbor. But what I had found interesting was they never said, how do you do that? And
I can think of some of my neighbors that say, yes, how would I do that?
How would I do that?
Yes, exactly.
And what this work that I started doing was really helpful was with the how. The how do you forgive people? How do you get past your own ego stuff and see from a bigger perspective? And it was making a big difference in my personal life and my work life. In my personal life, if any of us have children, you start dealing with kids who are teenagers, it's like, do you need to learn to calm down?
Have a little bit of patience and go, do I remember what it was like to be 17?
Yes, exactly. And it's very easy as a parent to take the child's behavior as an extension of me, and that it somehow reflects badly on me, and it's all about my ego and how the neighbors think of me. That's not what parenting is for, And so it was really useful for me to recontext my own parenting from the perspective of what is coming from my higher self and what is in the best interest of this child. I don't really care what the neighbors think. What is the best, highest, most loving thing to do in this situation? So practical applications of love with family, with neighbors.
Particularly with family.
With particularly family.
Yeah.
It was priceless. It was priceless information for me.
One of the things that I noticed within the integral community, but in the larger sort of spiritual community, right? Those of us that have been seeking for a while,
Yes.
right? And we look for something more than our modern lives gave us, which could be success, money, all those things. Not bad, but just you get to a certain point and you say there's just got to be more, and spirit comes online, love comes back online. At a higher level. It's not that it ever went away, but we just noticed that we want to practice it. And one of the challenges that we see in the community is that if we relate to this from an integral perspective, if we go in, right, and we sit on the cushion, and that's great, and we start having these state experiences, and we develop all of this question of embodiment, how it comes back out into the world, it's not that it's confusing. You're just going to go, well, somehow I have to integrate whatever is happening here for me out of my actions every day. And as you've pointed out, that's, you know, life's challenging. It's hard to do.
It
right?
is.
So that's what I found so useful about the spiritual intelligence assessment when I took it, is that it actually, in a measurable sort of way, kind of broke it down for me so that you could actually start to say, all right, so how is this integrating in everything, every interaction that I have, you know, how I go about my life and all the rest of it. So why don't we talk about the four perspectives that are in it, and then what the 21 skills cover.
Right. So I started by looking at spiritual exemplars, people I wanted to be more like, people that other people, I've now asked thousands of people, who are your spiritual exemplars? Who do you consider a spiritual leader? We get the same names again and again. The Dalai Lama, Jesus, Muhammad, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, people like that. And I started thinking, what makes them different? What skills do they have that I don't have? And started numbering them and putting them into groups. And we ended up with these 4 quadrants. In the upper left quadrant, this is not an exact parallel to integral.
No, I understand that. But this is useful, these 4 perspectives.
These
still.
4 perspectives.
Yes.
The upper left quadrant is higher self, ego, self-awareness. Am I aware of all the ways in which I need to align with my higher self and all the ways in which the ego can take me offline? And those skills in that quadrant include, am I aware of my life purpose or vocation? Am I aware of my personal values, and can I rank them in a hierarchy and really live from those values? And can I discern the voice of my ego from the voice of my higher self and differentiate and choose to listen to the higher self, like really put the egos in its proper place. It's a useful part of ourself, but not let it drive the car of my life.
Right. So one of the things that I found really interesting in that perspective was this whole values conversation, right? Because I think as I came in, and I suspect a lot of people in the Integral Life audience, is that when this next stage comes online, you sort of say, all right, so how can I make a contribution to making the world a better place? How can I reduce my own suffering and other people's suffering and so on, right? But then we actually, the rubber meets, that's a great goal, right? And certainly a higher aspiration. But then ultimately when you have to look at the parts of your life, like family and work and this, and particularly if we love our work, right? And we tend to get into it 6 and 7 days a week and wonder why the family is like going, where are you, right? So to make these choices, to have, when you asked me, I think, you know, we went through the values thing, I went, okay, so let's see. I mean, that lack of clarity was interesting to me, and I suspect for other people if you ask them the same thing. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, people will often say that they're values driven, that they live from, you know, good values, and they say, great, tell me what they are. And they're like, And it's interesting that just the act of writing things down is very clarifying. It helps you set your true north, your compass about how do you want to live, you know, who do you want to be. So you write them down, and sometimes you'll ask people to write them down, they don't even know where to start. So I might give them a list of values words and they'll start circling 15 and 20. Well, it's hard to make decisions from 15 and 20 values. So I say, can you narrow that down to 4 or 5 that are the really most important guiding principles of your life? And then they do that and they think they're done. And then I say, now put them in rank order. Oh,
because I can only make one choice in this moment.
In this moment, you may have to make trade-offs. And sometimes, I mean, many times you can get win-wins, but sometimes you have to choose between. And an example is often family versus work. And it can get complicated because you work to support the family, but are you working really beyond what you need to support the family? It's really inflating your ego and taking away from family time. Faith versus family is another conflict. People may say my faith is very important, my family is very important. What if those two come into conflict?
And particularly as spirit comes back online and we go seeking, right?
Yes.
So is that week workshop that I want to go to more important than going to the baseball game, right?
Yes.
And yes, I'm drawn, but no, and right?
Right, so how do you make those trade-offs?
Yeah.
And really differentiating values you've inherited from values you've freely chosen and values you claim you have versus values you live. So all of those conversations are very rich.
Yeah. So let's talk about what I call the rigorousness of this, right? Not that it's hard to take, but just that what has gone into this assessment, because you know, we all see these questionnaires or little reflection devices that we go through, but you really wanted more from this. Now, one of the reasons is because you wanted it to be able to be used in organizational settings, so it needed that kind of weight to it for them to consider it. But I also feel this in a personal life is that, you know, if we're just doing these things and they're kind of popcorn, they do, you know, may be useful for a moment, then it just kind of fade away. And I didn't have this experience with that. So can you talk a bit about, as you developed this, the rigorousness and how it was tested?
Yes, this was very carefully created because I wanted something that I could be proud of and I could take into organizations, but that I could show to any human being and they would say, this is really useful. And in a way, you know, we start with ourselves, right? What did I need to learn? I needed to know where the holes were in the work I was doing. I had been spending a lot of time at workshops and reading books. I mean, Amazon.com and I are bonded at the hip, you know? And so I'm reading and I'm studying and it's like, how do I know if I'm working on the right stuff? And that basic question, and looking at the spiritual exemplars, I thought there's got to be a way I can do for the spiritual journey what has been done with emotional intelligence, which is lay it out as a bunch of skills, 0 to 5 on each of these skills. You know, if you can't describe it with that level of concreteness, then you don't know what you're talking about. So if I seriously knew what I was talking about, I should be able to create something that would meet like PhD level standards of rigor. So we have been through rigorous creation of the questions. I had PhDs on staff that were working with me to create these questions to make sure they're well worded, Likert scales, carefully constructed, alpha testing, focus groups who analyze the vocabulary for clarity, beta testing with over 500 people looking for, you know, are we having interior reliability and all these other things that the statisticians look for. We did a construct validation which says, if somebody writes an essay or is interviewed, would someone score their spiritual intelligence the same way that the SQI, the assessment, would? And the answer was yes. And then a cross-correlation between my assessment and Suzanne Cook-Reuter's maturity assessment profile, looking at stages of development, and got a 99% probability that there is a relationship between higher stages and higher SQ scores. So we went through a lot of work and hundreds of thousands of dollars to make sure this thing is rigorous.
Right. And here was the true test for me, is I took it once, right? And I said, okay, so now I get a sense of kind of what she's asking for. I wonder if I can game this, right? Because I want to end up with all 5s because I'm just so spiritually intelligent, right? And so I attempted that a couple times. I just said, all right, so do I have a sense? Can I game this question and so on? And I just found it absolutely bulletproof. Was what I would call bulletproof, is that you couldn't do that, because I kept looking at the scores going, how did it know that?
How did it know that about me?
Right, what is that? Right, that was really where I got impressed by it, because I said, now this is really reflecting something that, as best I can try to explain myself and how spiritually intelligent I am, this is actually giving me a reflection of where I am, which is so useful for me to say, all right, so what are my next steps to improve? Yeah.
And whether you score a 0 or a 5 or anywhere in between, you will always get a next step suggestion, because we're never done. And it's like physical weightlifting. If you quit going to the gym, you will lose your muscle. If you quit working on your spiritual intelligence, you'll lose your scores. So, and it's never about the scores anyway. It's about finding that place we want to be. It's about evolving as people.
Right. The value, I think, particularly in these times, which most of us experience as certainly chaotic, the world's going through its own transition, we think, but certainly everywhere we look in terms of economically, environmentally, socially, there just seem to be challenges everywhere. So we can't change all of that necessarily. We can try, but it's really how we're going to hold that. And that's what I found so useful about it. I'm just going to call it a practice. I mean, we call it an assessment, which it is.
It is.
But ultimately, it's about approving our practice in the world to bring that better part of ourselves, the higher self, more into our daily life and just notice, even when we fail, that we have.
Yes, exactly. So my goal for myself was to show up as a loving person. What would it take to really live being a Christian as Jesus was commanding me to live? That's a tall order.
It is.
Love God, love your neighbor, love yourself. That's kind of my little mantra that I come back to, you know, and it's all three of those. I have to love myself. It's not about self-sacrificing and being a martyr, and it's not about just loving God. I also have to love every annoying other person on this planet. How can I do that? I have to stop seeing them as annoying. And where does the power for that perspective shift reside? It resides in here. Once I shift that perspective, I can come up with appropriate behaviors. But the same behavior coming from an unshifted perspective can feel like anger. It's like setting boundaries with your child. You can set boundaries from anger and, you know, feeling like you've embarrassed me, or you can set boundaries from love, and the child will feel the difference. And I believe that's how we need to show up. We need to show up from that place where the anger is not there. Doesn't mean we don't take very strong action, but we take it from a loving, peaceful place.
Nice. The other thing I noticed that in this whole personal development world, and or you can call it spiritual seeking or whatever it is that we all do as we go look for new sources and new teachers and new practices, is that it can be overwhelming sometimes. There's so much information out there. There's, you know, it's the next book and the next DVD. What I found really useful about the assessment is that it actually gave me a clue of where I should look, right? So if that's the thing I need to work on, so who's doing that, right? So that was really useful rather than these larger questions of, well, how do I just become a better person or a more loving person? Nothing wrong with those questions, but this really broke it down in a way that was very useful, I thought.
Thank you. What I intend to do with this is to point people in a direction, not to say you have to study this particular book or text. It's a faith-neutral but faith-friendly assessment. So if you decide I want to work on forgiveness, you can go to your faith tradition of origin and look for forgiveness literature from your faith tradition of origin. Or you can look for generic resources, which we also offer and we can point people to, like Byron Katie's work or Colin Tipping's work, you know, on radical forgiveness. Byron Katie's work called The Work, which is the work of life. Just fantastic resources, the Stanford Forgiveness Project. So we try to provide a very specific direction, and then within that very specific direction, a portfolio of choices that will feel aligned with who you are and what your faith tradition is.
That's so useful. Well, Cindy, thank you so much for bringing this the spiritual assessment to this community. I mean, I think everyone is going to find, for those of us that have taken it, and just go, wow, look what this thing actually reflects for us, and also the clues that it gives us about what our next step are. It's just so important, and I think going to be a part of a major wave moving forward here, so people are not going to want to miss out on that. They're going to want to actually see where they are and then see where this actually takes them. So thank you so much.
Thank you.